So in today's video, we're going to talk about the top 7 things that you might not know about loadouts when it comes to Warzone. If you do enjoy the video, learn something new, please do me a favor, hitting that like button. Goal on today's video is 2,500 likes. So hopefully you can help me crush that number. If you're brand new, want to find your way back for more Call of Duty content, just make sure you're subscribed with notifications on by hitting the red subscribe button and ringing that bell. Let's go ahead and get into the list. So we'll start off with some of the more obvious things, and that is that there is a guaranteed loadout. There's 2 per match. There's one right when the first zone is closing, when it's about to close, and there's approximately 12 seconds left, and that is going to land in proximity towards you, which we'll go ahead and talk about that aspect. And then there is another one when the zone 4 has completely closed and zone 5 is revealed before it actually starts closing. Right around the 45-second mark is when another loadout will drop, and it again is proximity based. So there's the first part of it. Obviously that one's a little bit more common, especially if you play often enough. You kind of got a good idea of, hey, you know, first loadout drops coming, second loadout drops coming, and that's typically the one you're going to grab when you come back from the gulag, just based off timing, or late game you want to go ahead and grab it because maybe you died along the way and you didn't have an opportunity to get the money together to get another loadout. So let's go ahead and talk about specific spawn locations, and these aren't 100% accurate, but you do have a little bit of control where your loadout is going to spawn. Most notably, what will end up happening is the algorithm tries to push the loadout close to the edge of the zone. Obviously, if you're far outside of it, which really isn't the case if there's only 15 or 12 seconds left, normally you're pretty close and it's almost completely closed. So a lot of times it's going to drop that loadout near as close as you are, and there's going to be specific locations where it's kind of designated to land. Obviously, if you landed over by the airfield, you know, kind of the hangars area, there's usually one that'll land there, one in front of the police station, in between Superstore and the police station, and it kind of just depends on where you're at in the motion. Sometimes if you're out in the field, it's going to go ahead and spawn in another specific location. So there's these various ones, and it's kind of important to be aware of those, especially for a couple different reasons. One is if you know where it's going to land, you kind of have a proximity of where it lands generally, you can always position yourself so that you have a good loadout landing, because there are obviously some that are a little bit more beneficial than others, and you'll kind of figure these things out as you continue to land in the same area. And this can be very powerful, especially when you get to that 5th zone loadout drop. A lot of times people kind of just land really quickly instead of actually having control of where their loadout's going to be. If you just glide in the middle of the map, it's probably going to go ahead and land somewhere in the middle of the map, which might not be the best case scenario. A lot of times if you go towards the edge of the map, it's going to go ahead and kind of creep up on that particular edge, so you'll have a good opportunity to grab it near the edge. And you'll notice this one pretty often, especially when you come right out of the gulag, just perfect timing. I've had it happen before where it's either the first loadout and the 5th loadout. If you're right on the side of prison, it's either going to land inside prison, which is pretty common, or right outside under the bridge or near the edge of the map, right by the red line where you're going to go out of bounds. So there are some specific designated areas based off your individual location. So this is more one of those things you got to be aware of, so that you have a little bit more control over it if it's situation based, instead of thinking, oh, you know what, where is it going to go? It's random. I know it's close to me, but I don't know exactly where. You can have a little bit more control. If you're used to landing a specific spot, you can force the landing of a specific loadout drop. So in addition to this, what you could always pay attention to is if you already have your loadout, or you just want to check the loadout site, they're proximity based like we just talked about. So a lot of times if you see the one singular loadout, that means that that area is fairly clear. Obviously somebody could have moved in and their loadout's pushing them a different direction or whatever the case is, but if you see 3 loadout drops drop and one of them is yours, then you know, hey, you know what, there's at least 2 teams nearby and they're probably going to be pushing to those loadouts. So a lot of times it's a good handy tip to make sure that when you hear the loadout drop, you kind of look towards the sky where it's at and figure out how many of them are dropping, so you can be better prepared to approach a scenario. If it's 3 loadout drops, you know 2 teams might engage on it. You can kind of gatekeep them, or you can hurry up and be as fast as possible, get your loadout first, and then just kind of watch those and grab them, because they're not likely going to have their loadouts, or at least not their ghost classes. So maybe you call a UAV or something like that. There's different dynamics you can play with that, but at least you'll understand that there are people in that general area. And I actually found this particularly helpful. I don't play a ton of solos much, but when I did play solos, you can actually see kind of where people are at the edge of the zone. A lot of times if you have your single loadout and there's 3 on the right, 3 on the left, and then 2 further away, then you kind of have an idea, okay, there's going to be 2 on the right, I could push that way. Same thing with different teams. Sometimes teams are spread out, so it could be a little bit less reliable, but obviously in solos, everyone's solo. So when you see 3 loadout drops to the right, you know, okay, there's 3 people on that side, and you can use that to your strategic advantage, especially at that zone 5 loadout drop. Another side note, if you do run spotter, which people don't tend to run within Warzone. It is kind of an underrated perk just because it's only useful when it ends up being useful versus a lot of other perks. They're more active all the time because Ghost is always going to be active. You have Amp switching between weapons, which you're always switching through weapons, especially if you're using a sniper rifle, SMG, rifle combination somewhere in there where you're going to be swapping weapons pretty often. That definitely comes in handy over Spotter, but Spotter can be a good tool, especially when the loadout drops falling. You can actually mark them and kind of see through the object and see when they disappear. And we'll go ahead and talk about that aspect right now. So there are certain rules about loadout drops that normally you wouldn't know about unless you spend a lot of time working with loadout drops. So there's typically 3 different rules for loadout drops. The first one being that it'll disappear after 10 minutes has elapsed. So once it comes in, if no one grabs it or a couple of team members grab it, it will just automatically disappear after 10 minutes have elapsed if it happened to be in the zone. Because let's say you're towards the middle of the circle, and when it first landed, it lands in the middle somewhere and it stays there. It's just gonna naturally dissolve after 10 minutes and it'll completely disappear. And the other rule with loadout drops is there can only be 2 on the map at any given time, and this can be particularly important when we get to one of our future steps, but let's go ahead and kind of continue from there. So you can only have 2 loadouts. So if you happen to call one in and then you get the free one and then you call another one in, that first one will disappear. So it's just something to be aware of. And then the third thing is a lot of people aren't aware of this and they think it's a bug or something like that. So let's say you're playing quads and you go ahead and buy the first loadout. So everyone goes and grabs it and then you're good to go. And then when the free one drops, let's say somebody doesn't need to pick up a second loadout, or they're perfectly fine with their overkill class. They don't want to get ghost. They don't want to worry about restock or anything like that. 3 of your team members can grab from the actual loadout and it won't disappear until all 4 players have grabbed it. Then what will end up happening is if anyone on the team dies and they happen to come back from the gulag, you'll still have that loadout just sitting there for up to 10 minutes or until another free one has dropped in or you bought one in that made it forced to disappear because there was at least 2 on the map besides that one. So what that means is if you have 3 people die, go to the gulag, they can all come back, grab the loadout again up until the time that that 4th player that has never touched it grabs the loadout. So this could be used strategically if you want to just leave it behind. If there's good placement, you could throw it in the middle of the zone so it's within the ring. So if somebody just happens to die, they'll be able to come back and get the loadout and they don't have to wait till that 5th zone to actually run up and grab that loadout. Prior to one of the recent updates, if you bought a loadout and you end up dying with it in your inventory, it would just vanish and disappear. But somewhere between season 3 and season 4, if you buy the loadout, it still takes that field upgrade spot, which sometimes you end up leaving your dead silence or stopping power or whatever the case is when you buy it. But if you're roving around with it and you end up dying with it, it'll actually drop in place. So if you happen to kill a team before they end up actually calling it in, but they still had it on their inventory, you're gonna double check those bodies because it'll just look like a smoke until you kind of hover over it and then it shows you that it's a field upgrade for a loadout. So this can kind of work out for you just on good timing, especially if you're able to see them buy the loadout and then you insta kill them. But obviously that's just kind of one of those rare things. But if you want to go ahead and check people's bodies, really good, especially around loadout areas. If they were just wiped, definitely make sure to see if they actually have that smoke. This one's a little bit more obvious, but I do get questions on it pretty often. A lot of times people think, hey, you know what, I bought one loadout, we got the perks, and then we go and get the second loadout, we got more perks, we get the 5th zone loadout, we got more perks, so we should have a total of 9 perks, right? I know for most people, they realize it right away that that's not the case. It's whatever your most recent loadout grab is, those are the 3 perks you're running with. So if you happen to grab overkill in the first one, and then you go ahead and grab the next loadout, you're gonna end up with Ghost. If you ended up grabbing Ghost in the first one, and you decide to grab Overkill in the second one, you were going to basically remove your Ghost. And this is pretty evident when anytime you had like a restock, it's not going to restock your perks after you kind of swap that out to Ghost. You kind of just lose those perks. If you had something besides Amped, in case you want to run Spotter, you're going to end up losing the Amp and you're going to notice how slow your weapon exchanges when you do swap weapons. Other side note, when it just does come to perks, because they still haven't fixed the bug, I did a video a little bit explaining and showing it, but literally when you come back from the gulag, it normally shows 3 different perks that you have when you're landing. That's just a bug. You do not actually have those perks in case you were trusting that little HUD thing that comes up showing the weapons you have when you're landing. So the next one is I've almost never seen anyone use, and I think people don't really understand the concept of it, and that is loadout drops are indestructible. They cannot be blown up by C4, they can't be destroyed by some other method. They just sit there and they follow those few rules I was talking about, which is the 10-minute time limit, 2 on the map, or full team actually grabs the loadout. So as a result of this, you can actually be very strategic with these things and block certain paths. So if you're protecting a certain building because you know it's going to be late zone, if you had enough money together and there's 2 ways up, you could always block one path, just make it a little bit easier for your team to focus, especially if you're in a low man situation where there's only 2 of you because you're playing duos. Maybe you block one of the stairways or doorways or something like that. And you can literally block it where somebody can't get through it. They can only move it, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. So there's a couple of different strategies to this. You're going to see some prison gameplay where we actually block the ladder. Purposely had this gameplay to kind of show an example of that. But there's several of these scenarios that you could do depending on the zone and position your team and money and stuff like that. But it could be very powerful because then people are locked in a certain area, so you know that they can only be coming up from another one. So you could either block it with claymores, have better ADS spots where you're locking down that lane and you don't really have to worry about covering that backside. And a lot of people aren't aware of it just because of how expensive it is. So now let's go ahead and talk about the next thing, which is that the loadout drops are movable. So there's a couple different ways you can move them. Most obvious is a vehicle. Obviously, if you run into it with the vehicle, you'll push it forward. If someone's sitting behind it, it will kill that person. It's like when it comes in contact, it's the same as a vehicle. It's instantly going to kill you if there's any movement to it. And I've seen people die by that pretty easily. I've been behind it, somebody runs into it, and I'm thinking I'm blowing up the car. The momentum of the car hits it forward. It kind of moves a little bit enough, and that'll actually kill you. So that's something to be aware of. You can also move it with weapons. It's just not very effective when you're using a rifle because you're going to waste a lot of ammo, but shotguns are great for it. So snake shots used to be the way to go. You could just move it over, especially when you're combining it with that blocked doorway. You can shoot it as much as you want and it's not going to disappear. It's not going to break. It's not going to damage unless one of those 3 rules happen. And the last thing is you can actually grab it through a wall. So you can actually call in a specific area, get to cover, and through the wall you can grab the loadout so you're in the comfort of your own safety. So I'll go ahead and show a couple clips that I saw from It's Iron so you guys can see exactly what that looks like and how effective that could be at making sure you're not getting sniped when you're grabbing your loadout. So hopefully you enjoyed the video or learned something new. If you did, please remember to hit that like button. If you're brand new, want to find your way back for more Call of Duty content, just make sure you subscribe with notifications on and you'll be able to find your way back to the channel. Appreciate all the support on the content. Thank you for watching. As always, have a great day.